All right. Well, good stuff. Well, Ivo, it's a pleasure to meet you. Welcome to In Search of Wisdom.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to chatting about your new book, Paradoxical Leadership. But before we get into the book, we generally spend a few minutes and talk about how you came to be interested in paradoxes. I know you have a background in philosophy. How did this all get started?
Yeah, well, I think it's deeply ingrained in who I am. I think, yeah, my mother was Dutch and my father was Belgian. Well, for you in the US, it's completely the same because they speak the same language, but it's two cultures. And also being raised in this bicultural environment that makes you think about the different aspects of yourself and switching between different religions. And like you said, I studied philosophy, and there I was also interested in paradoxes. I wrote my thesis on logical paradoxes, the liar's paradox. This sentence is not true. If it's true, it's not true, etc. And that also introduced that aspect of going at a meta level, because at the level of the sentence you cannot say. But anyway, you have to go at a higher level. And anyway, after my philosophy studies, that was resting 25 years, and then it came back again. I was a consultant, traveling a lot for my work with throughout Europe, and there I was puzzling about the question: how can we live in a sustainable way? And that relates to, well, on that one hand, you got this paradigm of unlimited growth, personal growth, economic growth, and everyone wants to grow. But on the other hand, you have to limit your footprint. You have to diminish, in fact, your footprint. So, in fact, you came to a kind of two opposites, and either you were for sustainability, either you were for growth. And you can be something in the middle. You can be a kind of compromise, but my question was, is it possible to have both? Because growth is a deep human need, but sustainability is another very important need. So can we have both? And I was thinking about, it was the time of Second Life, the predecessor of the metaverse. Well, maybe we can, yeah, grow unlimitedly in the virtual world, not knowing that all these server parks need a lot of electricity, or we can, yeah, expand in our limitless imagination. Anyway, I don't know. I don't say that these are the solutions, but it started me thinking about, well, looking at every societal problem, they have two sides, and how can we bring them together? That was one, well, very important driver for me to get this thinking about paradoxes. It was, well, my first book was in 2013, in 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago. And also from my experience as a consultant, I saw organizations flip flop from one side to the other, centralized, decentralized, etc. And a lot of value that was built up was destroyed again. So my thinking was also, is there another way of changing, changing societies, changing organizations, changing yourself? And the third source that is of course back to myself, because it always starts with yourself. I've now written 4 books about this topic, but yeah, it's on the one hand, it is about yeah, changing things in society or in organization, but in fact, you write these books to better understand yourself. So,
Mm.
and that's also the puzzle. If I do one personality test, I'm a complete introvert. Doing another, I'm a complete extrovert. And the question is, who is the real Ivo? And that's an identity question that a lot of people struggle also with today. Who are you? Are you this, or are you a broad range of different, well, aspects of yourself that also have their place in yourself as a whole? So these are, well, a long introduction to say, well, that it touched me really. It's not something, well, I'm going to write a book about paradoxes because At the time in 2008, nobody talked about paradoxes. So it was something that I developed a little bit by researching myself and just, well, let's say 2017, 2018, I discovered that there were also parallel researchers overall all in the world. So it was interesting to it's kind of parallel evolution, you see on different continents coming because the time is ripe to do this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that this work with paradoxes goes all the way back to your thesis. So quite a bit of time exploring this, and there's still much to explore. Maybe as a place to start for any listeners that might be new to terms like polarities and paradoxes, how would you maybe define those and differentiate if needed for any
Mm.
listeners out there?
All right, that's a very good question. In fact, any everyone knows a dilemma. You have to make a kind of choice. Are you going, for example, doing your emails tonight, or are you going out with friends or going to the movies? Well, that's a dilemma. You cannot do both. You have to make a choice. Well, you can do both, but that's not ideal. Huh? And that's a dilemma. But that's at the level of the surface. Deeper, there are the deeper drivers of people, and that is on the one hand for example, my need to relax, and on the other hand my sense of duty, my sense of responsibility. And these are two, let's say, two little angels whispering something different in my ear. These are the polarities. These are the underlying needs and values that drive my behavior. Also in other contexts, dilemma is specifically on a specific context. These polarities are parts of myself, struggling. And the paradox in my thinking is the combination of two, and that is mostly you can phrase a paradox in terms of a question. In this example, how can I do my duties in a very relaxed way? And there are different ways to do that. But anyway, that is phrasing the question in a different way. So the different levels. And I think for me, my book, the name of my book is Paradoxical Leadership. But yeah, the basis is the polarities that are the cornerstone of the whole work. Polarities and getting to the polarities, and therefrom that is the basic material where you can build new combinations, new both end solutions. Hope this is clear.
Be-
Well,
no, beautiful. And something that's maybe going to come up, you've kind of touched on it already, of either or thinking and both and thinking. And a question you pose in the book is, why is either or thinking so attractive? So why is there a pull towards this either or?
oh, it gives enormous clarity, because you have to. If you say, okay, Joshua, what kind of person are you? Are you a blue person or a red person or a yellow person, in terms of management types or whatever? Well, it's clear to say, yes, that is clear, that is predictable. And for example, for a leader, it's very clear that this is the direction we're going to centralize, or we're going to decentralize, or we're going to innovate or stabilize. So it's enormously attractive, and it can work quite well. It can work well in situations that, in fact, you need a kind of very clear direction, but only for a moment, only for a very limited uh, lapse of time, because otherwise, uh, the aspect of polarities is that both are connected, and the one cannot without the other. If you centralize a lot, if take that example, well, then it becomes bureaucratic. So then you need the other side, let's say, close to your market, decentralized, etc. If you do that too much, then it becomes a liability in the sense that everything is loose sand and there is no connection anymore. So you go back to, so both poles need each other. Um, and therefore, it's only for a short term that you can say, in a crisis, let's say, well, let's go that way. For example, if you're organization is at the brink of collapse, then well, you say, well, let's focus now on stabilizing what we have and put all the innovation projects in the fridge, for example. But that only works for a limited period of time. And also there, in crisis, it can be quite dangerous. We saw that in the COVID crisis, that we never estimated the downside of having a lockdown, for example, on the implication on mental health, on domestic violence, etc. So that is the other side that we did not foresee. So it's always has these two sides, and also in such a crisis, you have to balance both. You have to balance mental health and physical health, or economy and then people. So it's always kind of trade-off where you try to have, well, the best of both in that sense. So it is quite attractive, but it has its large disadvantages, of course, because yeah, you see that, and let me name some of them. That is, organizations and society goes from one side to the other because you overemphasize this one. So the system has to self-correct, but the system always self-corrects. But it can be with a big bang, or it can be in a fluent way. And often we do that in a big bang. Often when organizations change, because then they're confronted with so much liabilities of the strategy, that they have to go 180 degrees turnaround to compensate that. So that is a lot of value that is created, it will be destroyed again, and that is something that is not a very sustainable way. And it also doesn't, well, it is quite frustrating also for people who work in an organization, because then you say, well, what you did in the past was not good. Now this is the new course, and this is the holy grail now. And people who work a long time in an organization have seen these flip-flops for many years, and they become cynical. And another big issue with this whole either or thinking is that you get a polarized situation, where, because we love to have these both poles to put them in a neat box, but then it's pure. It's pure, and we put a Chinese wall between them. We got in an organization an innovation department and a finance department, and they're doing all finance, they're doing all innovation. But by doing this, you interrupt, let's say, the self-correcting mechanism, the feedback mechanisms. And anyway, then it starts polarizing, and then it clashes, and it is not a very productive way. So my thinking is also about how can we get from a polarized situation back to a good normal dialogue. And of course, also either or, you get endless discussions in organizations, for example, between, are we going to change the structure and then the culture will follow, or are we going to start with the culture? Well, both are true, of course, but anyway, you can have endless discussions about this. This is the chicken or the egg, like we said here so I think it's it was certainly in this time, because in a world that is reasonably small, these impacts are quite small. But we live in a globalized world, in an open world, where disbalances in one side of the world have an immediate impact elsewhere. See the COVID crisis, for example, or economic instability, etc.
It's a fascinating thing, this pendulum swing or overcorrection. I think any of the listeners in organizations have probably experienced maybe some sort of overcorrection. I spent my adult life in the military, and I know that was, a thing that comes up of you go to the opposite pole. I'm curious to ask from an individual perspective. It seems like maybe something that comes to mind is picking up a new exercise habit. Like maybe there's a pain point, you're made aware that a change in lifestyle needs to happen, So you swing to this other side and create some sort of really rigorous 5 or 6 day a week, exercise routine, which obviously isn't sustainable in the long term oftentimes, and it creates another pain point and issues maybe at work and family, and then it swings back. The middle way, how can we see that middle way a little easier
Yeah,
maybe?
yeah. Well, it is. I'm not an advocate for let's say what Aristotle say the golden middle way. In fact, sometimes you have to go left, and sometimes well you have to have the flexibility to move around this axis. Um, but I think it's very important to be conscious about it and to, for example, working hard and playing hard. For example, if you get signals that you're maybe too far in the hard working side, huh? And often we don't listen to this signal, so we go into the red, and then we're totally exhausted and we need to rest, or we get into a depression if it's or a burnout if it. So if we monitor these signals, because every system, your body, an organization or society gives these signals very clear, and you only have to listen to it. For example, in an organization, you have people who always who are a kind of the how you call it, the canaries in the mine.
Yeah.
They notice that something is going in the wrong direction. They start to complain, and you say, well, they are complaining, etc. But anyway, maybe the solution that they propose is not the right solution, but they give the signal, and it's interesting to take serious the signal, as that you take the signals of your own body or your own, because these systems are self-correcting. You don't have to do much about it, just only listen to that. So, and then you can take the turn more in a more fluent way. So I think we need to be a full person. We need a full range, from being extrovert to introvert, from but and in some context you need to be very extrovert, in some well it needs to be reflective, etc. But know when you're going too far, when something becomes a liability. That helps, and that requires, and we probably going to talk about that, some skills, and one of the most important skills is self-reflection on that side, and
Mm.
self-awareness, not only for yourself but also as a part of an organization where you work for.
Nice. And you talk about in the book the fundamentals of both and thinking, and you identify three. And I want to touch on the first one, valuing the power of both sides.
Mhm.
Could you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, well, valuing both sides is sometimes not so difficult, because then we say, well, we have to stabilize and we have to innovate. Well, that's equal value. Of course, everyone understands that you need stability, you need innovation. But what about these kind of unvalues? Let's say that we saw decay or destruction, or let's say grief or emotion, or that you're more, let's say, timid or introvert. These are values that are not so valued in our society. But they have, in my thinking, they have a role to play, because they are counterbalancing something. If you're always happy, 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 there is something that you put aside, and that is maybe your let's say, I don't know how you say it in English, your grieving side, or your tristesse, or whatever that is. And if you don't allow that, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Everything what you put away becomes
Mm.
enormously big. That's the pink elephant in the room, where nobody talks about, but is so
Yeah.
present. You see that what I call shadow, organizations that are very, let's say, um, comforting, familiar, hugging, etc. they often are very hard organizations because they cover something up that is not in the mainstream but in the stream below, and that is jealousy, selfishness, because these are not values. No, we are all connected, etc. But everything what is below the surface is determining the behavior. So valuing is getting the positive side of things that you probably dislike or at the first sight find repulsive, and say what can be the, how can I use, how can I not suppress it, but how can I use the power that lies beneath it in a good, in a positive way. You see that books like The Power of Vulnerability or The Power of Silence, the power, these are all books that become bestsellers, mega sellers. Why? Because they tap into something that is not recognized as being a value. No, it is
Mm.
more the lack of something else. And then people get the recognition, and then while a whole of lot of energy comes free. So it is something that is extremely powerful, um, and it is looking on what is the positive value below that is not always obvious. For example, um, myself, I have difficulty to have clear boundaries. I say, well, I do that for you. I take on this responsibility. I do this until it's like here, and then it's one question and it's too much and I explode. You see only the behavior, but it's an extreme reaction towards not setting my boundaries clear enough from the start, let's say, and therefore it gets not in a very it is not in a just relaxed way. Now then it's too much, and then you get this shadow coming in. So that is, get to the bottom of what, how can this help me? How can this also be a value? Decay or destruction can be a value because it can create new opportunities for growth and new opportunities. And people like decay because I wrote in a book, people go to old ancient cities with a lot of ruins, and they enjoy just this something that is in their eyes decay. Well, that's not the value. So that's a little bit what I want to say with that, and I think it's very important to do so instead of pushing it under the carpet.
Yeah, and it can be a challenging thing depending on the particular side. It reminds me of Thich Nhat Hanh's book. The late Zen master wrote a book, No Mud, No Lotus,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
he talks about that and happiness and suffering. It can be a challenging thing to value that side of suffering. Obviously, the happiness for most of us is an easier side to put
yeah,
value to.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, but I don't say that you have to seek unhappiness,
Yeah.
but I say if there is unhappiness, well, let it be, instead of trying to put it away and try to be joyful, etc. Because it doesn't disappear by being joyful. It is there, and it just needs to come out in one way or another. And it can come in out in an extreme way, or it can outcome in a normal way. And so I'm not a guru saying seek unhappiness, people.
Yeah, and we'll get into it towards the end of the conversation, but it reminds me of one of the skills, this allowing discomfort. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like allowing it to be, subtle difference, but an important one. Can I ask a curiosity question to you? You said back in 2008 when you were writing, your first book on the topic, not as many people were talking about paradoxes. Now a few months back, we had another author on of both and thinking. I know in some recent courses that I've went through in the last decade or so, this idea of polarities and paradoxes has been integrated. But as you talk about in the book, it's not a new idea. You like Lao Tzu, Heraclitus, the Buddha, many of these other things. The philosopher Karl Jaspers called this period the axle period, 2,500 years ago. How do you make sense of, 2,500 years ago, many different parts of the world talking about some of these ideas, and then maybe now today it getting some momentum and things like that? How do you think about or make sense of that?
Yeah, that is, yeah, Lao Tse and Heraclitus, that was in fact two completely different cultures, the Greek one and the Chinese one, who came up with this idea that the universe consists of powers the dynamic of opposing forces, and as a creator of life, etc. Um, I think well, what is driving our culture also is the question. Well, hey, we got it in all the religions of the book, where you got the heavenly powers and the earthly powers, and well, heaven is much stronger than earth. So you got the kind of, and Plato is also kind of dualistic world, where you get the world of ideas is nice, and the rest is just the material world is just an illusion, in fact. Huh? So you get also this dualistic thinking, and that worked well because we live also. I think in our Western culture, it's the idea of makeability, that you can shape the world like you want, with science and technology, etc. But we're now running into some boundaries, because all the complex issues that we face today are not technical questions. The migration issue, or the climate issue, or the economic issue, but these are very complex complex challenges, where in fact you always need to have both sides. If you do on one side, it goes just the other way around. So you have to work on different press on different buttons at the same time. And now I think, because my first book appeared in 2013 in Dutch, and after 1 year it was, well, it was a kind of discounted, and well, no one wanted to buy the book. It was the most beautiful book ever written, by the way, but anyway, it was not recognized. But then 4 or 5 years later, I wrote a second book, Paradoxical Leadership, in Dutch, and it became a success, a huge success, because the time has incredibly changed, and we're living now in this what we call a VUCA world, volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous, and that has become increasingly, well, difficult. So managers, but also politicians are looking on ways to, yeah, to tackle these profound questions in a different way, and they see that linear thinking doesn't work anymore. So I think it's really the need that, yeah, that we need another way of thinking to approach these kind of complex questions. Otherwise, they were long solved. But we're against the kind of limitation in this, and a lot of, also in leadership, one sees that, okay, the paradigm of the strong leader who knows the solution, that's not it. It's much more complex. It is much more a balancing act than a kind of that decisiveness act. That is not on the level of dilemmas. It's on the level of polarities, and interconnected polarities.
It's such an interesting thing. You were talking about growing up in these different cultures, and it's a fascinating thing of like as you talk about the maybe some sort of stereotypical leader identifying and pointing some sort of direction or something like that. But when you travel a lot, and if you're able to experience these different cultures, like you the particular culture where you were raised, there's a set of it's this way, it's that way. Then you can go to the other side of the world and it's the complete opposite, and it works as well. It's like there's not necessarily the way. There's many ways, but sometimes it's difficult to see that. Like traveling cultures is one way. Are there any other ways that come to mind that's maybe helped you to see some of these paradoxes and maybe see a bit of the both sides?
Um, uh, well, just maybe that's not an answer to your question, but I think well a good an interesting example I witnessed recently. I work with a number of big cities in the Netherlands, like Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Also in their yeah, how to work with the city. And what one of my contact persons gave an interesting example of you get some neighborhoods where people throw out their old bread from their balconies down, and well, it's polluted the public space, and you get rats, and you get pigeons, and you get all kind of. And
Mm,
then you say, well, you need to be repressive on this because this is not very civil behavior, and you have to have fines, etc. And that is one way of to approach it. But interesting is if you talk to these people who come from another culture, in their culture, throwing the bread that is left over is kind of giving it back to the earth,
mm,
and they don't want to have waste because waste is something that is sinful or whatever. Eh? So the paradoxical solution is how can we use the driver that is in their culture to transform that in something different, and maybe not throw it out of the balcony, but maybe use it to make electricity or use it to make cakes or whatever. Huh? So that is how can you transform it, because the dilemma is what we see, that is people throwing bread out of the windows, scandalous how they do that. But what is below that, and that's interesting, and that is also asking the question and being curious, why are you doing that? And we presuppose often that these people are of the other people are uncivilized, or they don't know etc., or they are just stupid, or but there are often, and that is these positive drivers, that is this value thing. What are the positive drivers be, because people that don't want something, they want something else, they want, so what is this positive thing that they want? I don't know if it's an answer to a question, but
no, I think that's really helpful and interesting, and something we'll talk a little bit about of humility. I don't know. It's an interesting thing how humility is. I don't know. It seems to me like in my own experiences, like, how might I be wrong, or some sort of, even, as you talk about some of these things of seeing the other side, seems to be such an important thing. And it reminds me of something that made me laugh in the way of these paradoxical interventions
yeah.
of the driving while texting. Could you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, a paradoxical intervention is in fact that you do the opposite what you want, what you want to realize. In fact, instead of yeah, well, you want to convince someone, and then you can have the one argument after the other, and trying to convince with arguments. And the more you convince, the more the other get into resistance, because no one want to be changed from the outside. So you could do the other way. You could say, "Well, yes, I completely agree with you. What a beautiful idea! It's fantastic. Well, we have to share that with humanity, and then exaggerate it a little bit, so that the other person is well, oh, okay, he's not against me. So start thinking and start self-correcting itself, because otherwise you got the polarity saying." he's in this side and you're in that side, and you're getting kind of balance in this way. But it's very interesting to leave it with the person, and that the self-correcting is there, not you self-correcting. And the example I wrote in the book is about, well, there are a lot of accidents with young drivers in the weekend where they text while they drive. And you got all kind of campaigns to dissuade people to do so. That can be very soft campaigns, but also very confrontational campaigns with a lot of blood and etc. To get this shock effect. But anyway, if I if I take it personally, if I see there's such a campaign, say, well, okay, yeah, that's for other people, but not for me, because I can text and drive perfectly. Now, this driving school in Belgium had that is a nice clip on YouTube. There's a driving school, and the driver instructor said to the young driver, let's say, well, it's not enough for you to drive well to get your driver's license. You have to drive and text together, and then you get your driver's license. And then you see, okay, right? They got their mobile phone at hand, and they start to get difficult maneuvers with obstacles, and you see these people getting totally white and scared and anxious, until someone said, well, sir, what you ask from us, that is completely irresponsible. And then you are where you are. And that's a, well, it's a little bit manipulative, but it can be sometimes a way to get out of a deadlock. Because you get two positions, and if you go, you can, the more you push on this side, the more the other side get in his pole, but you can also go in the pole of the other one, and then the other makes the move. So it's interesting. It's always this dynamic between these poles, and it is a little bit playing with this dynamic that can be quite effective.
I love it, and it's it's such an interesting thing of the experience of something. You know, you can experience trying to text and drive and maneuver and things like that, and you're made aware very quickly that it's unbelievably challenging and not a wise thing to try to do. But that can be difficult for us to come to that realization, to get the opportunity to, you know, in a safe way experience something and
Mhm.
maybe see both sides. But this you know, the paradox in your work and the work that other people are doing in this area, it's like it seems like a way to help us see clearly, you know, to see both in Stoic philosophy and many others, this like view from above, but
Mhm.
also not just a view from above. You know, they talk about seeing the whole and the part. So it's like holding the view from right here on the ground and above at the same time to see clearly and make wise decisions. So I just love the work that you're doing, and you know, appreciate over these many decades all that you've been doing. You know, around paradox. I think it's so important. So I thought we could maybe finish up the conversation and talk about how to be paradoxically competent. And I want to
Mhm.
read something that you write in the book, which I think is so counterintuitive for much of us. You write, we tend to categorize and seek clear profiles of ourselves and of others. Our whole culture is permeated by the myth of some sort of unambiguous self. Could
Mhm.
you unpack that a bit, and you know why that's an important
Yeah.
thing?
Well, it gives a lot of identity is one of the number one issues at this time. People is trying to define myself. If you are this, who am I? And how do I relate to you? And what is my specific identity? And identity can be a helpful thing, but it can also be a narrowing thing. And going back to my aspect of we are all kind of a melting pot of very, very, very different aspects. And for every characteristic we have the contrary also, because we need that contrary to counterbalance. If we're all only givers, well, then you get exhausted. You need to be a taker also. If you're always, let's say, unselfish, well, you need to have this selfish thing. So in fact, it's always this balance. And you can say, well, I'm, let's say, more a giver than a taker, but you can say, well, it's 70%, 30%, but it can be 90-10, but it can never be 101, 100 nil, because you need always these both sides. And if I look at identity, who are you then? Well, you said, well, yeah, you're all this, but that's not so very satisfying, because, yeah, well, that's quite chaos. So I use often the metaphor of a bus. We're not one person. We're a whole bus of people, and there is one in the driving seat, and after the driver there are some sub personalities of yourself that you know very well. These are, for example, roles. You got from a reflective role to a more let's say active role, or you can change that, and you can change it like a director changes the cast of his film, saying, okay, it is now your turn to get to the steering wheel. But also you get in the back end of the bus aspect of yourself that you really don't want to see and you don't like, and that is the selfish guy, or the the aspects of yourself that you don't want to see. But anyway, sooner or later they will come to the front of the bus and take over the steering wheel, and that can be, let's say, to go back to my example, if I find myself that uh, having clear boundaries is for me something has the connotation of being selfish, because and therefore I put it really at the back of the bus. But anyway, when I'm on holiday, it comes back and I get the angry Ivo gets on the steering wheel. Now, in my thinking, it is not, you're not the director of this bus, but you are the one who observe the bus and the different persons in the bus, and you know who is at the driving wheel at that point. So who are you? You are not, well, you are more than all these different aspects of yourself. You're also the person, or the person who can, and that is your link with Buddhism, etc., who can observe the whole bunch of people that you are, and also can make deliberate choices. Not always, but is that, and this gives a much more space and much more possibilities. In fact, to because these are all aspects of yourself, and you know when something comes up, but often we are not aware of this, and this is something that triggers us. If my son and daughter are very nasty, I get very authoritarian, for example. Oh, right, that's a trigger. That's my reaction. If I know that, oh, right, okay, I mean, an authoritarian, oh, all right, but I'm also a nice father. So do I need to go in this role, or have I have the liberty to take this role on or not? Huh? And that is, I think, the power of, and this self-observation is so crucial, I think, as a crucial, one of the crucial skills in this. I think it's the basis of well, the eight skills that I work out in the book. But I think it's the basic layer also, and that's more internally focused, and most competencies are externally focused. It's about behavior, but this is kind of uh, an internal quality that is, I think, and it's a kind of meta competency, because there you can see what competency that you use in what situation. That is, let's say, the master director of the whole bunch, let's say. Yeah, and sometimes you have to be more at the background, sometimes you have to show off, etc. So you make more conscious choice than it overcomes you.
I love it. I think that is such a Beautiful and important idea. I made a note here of a Tolstoy quote that I want to highlight, but essentially you just laid out exactly what he was saying so beautifully, and I have a question for you. But Tolstoy wrote, one of the most common and generally accepted delusions is that everyone can be qualified in some particular way, said to be kind, wicked, energetic, so on. I'm paraphrasing here. But he said people are not like that. Everyone bears within them the germs of every human quality. Now manifests one, now another, and it just kind of goes on there. You don't see a lot of that. And I mean, I read a lot of books. Obviously, I interview a lot of authors. You don't necessarily even see a lot of that, which I think is such an important idea, and maybe a difficult one to grasp and accept. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Um, I don't know. Is that your experience? Like, why is that? Why do you think this is an important idea and maybe not as commonly talked
Yeah.
about?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because it might be confusing, that you say, well, but anyway, I need to have a very sharp profile, also on my CV or on my LinkedIn profile. I'm about this, and not about that. And it gives a lot of comfort, but I think the big advantage of this self-reflection is, that it helps you to empathize with others, because if you recognize all the aspects of others in yourself. And what we often do is, for example, they say, well, I'm not judgmental, but these people are very, very judgmental. Or, well, let's say, or people who looks down on other people, I find them despicable. What I'm doing is exactly the same. So that is then the blind spot, and being aware of that, you can help you start a conversation with people, because you recognize this aspect of being better as someone else also in yourself. Right, okay. And that allows you to be much more mild, regarding others, than saying, okay, I'm right and they are wrong. And that is a way also to start a real dialogue, instead of, let's say, my position versus your position. um, and your my polarization is very attractive, because if you're for this and I'm for the opposite, well, you make me feel alive, because I know this is where I stand for, and this is where I stand. And the more you say that, the more I get, a sense of purpose. And you saw it in the Cold War. The two parties needed each other, and if one collapsed, well, the other get into an identity crisis. Yeah, who am I? So sometimes, let's say, also you see that with dictators, if you have a problem inside with all kind of tensions, you get an external enemy, because the external enemy gives closure of all the ranks. And it's much more difficult to break that. It requires that you, yeah, well, first of all, see that pattern, and that you question yourself, in that, is that something I want, or is that, and what are the negative consequences of that? Because it doesn't help you solve problems anyway. It only gets us in a deadlock, for that sense.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing. Our minds are naturally categorizing and labeling, good, bad, tall, short, whatever it may be. Like the Tao Te Ching talks about, one side obviously giving birth to the other. Once there's short, there's tall. In Zen, it seems like they stress seeing kind of beyond words, you know.
Hmm.
without these constructs of words. But it makes me think of like in your book, this idea of both and thinking. It's not necessarily suggesting that you abandon either or thinking, or by any way
No.
that's not needed, because it is. And it's, I don't know, it seems like this is a similar thing in terms of, like, yes, the labels and the classifications and the words help. It allows us to have a conversation and you to write a book, but in a way of, how do you see when the limitations of them, and when it's a time for curiosity and wonder, to maybe, how do you hold all the words and the labels and assumptions to the side?
Yeah. It is. It's a very useful tool to categorize and to make differences, because we need, that is our language, we need to make differences, etc. But if differences become absolute, or as aspects
Mm-hmm.
that becomes our identity, where we identify with this, yeah, then it becomes a limitation. But anyway, I can say, I can give you my personality profile, and I have I'm very planned, I'm very controlled, etc. I've also this other side. But anyway, I'm conscious about it. I know also when I get, um, when it's overdone, when I exaggerate, when I then I can in some way control it better, or make it more use it in a better way. And I think, um, I got this beautiful example of. I was giving this lecture for a private equity firm, and they say, well, we have a bunch of startups, and you're listening to your story. The startups who are the most performant are the ones with a very creative chief executive and a very strict CFO, financial officer,
Mm-hmm.
and they both believe in their thing. Yeah? That's in one in creativity and growth, and the other in bottom line results. If they can also go on a higher level and see their view, they can passionately believe in their view, but see it as a kind of, um, partly vision, and that it needs to support a higher purpose. Then it's an enormous driver of this diversity is an enormous driver of performance and success and whatever, and happiness. If they don't see that higher purpose, if they see, "Oh, I'm right," etc., well, then you got a completely split in the organization. And so it is, like you said, it is believing it, embodying it, but on the other hand, being at the meta level and observing it. So it is not only observing it like we're kind of meditating all the time. It's not only in the action mode, it is switching between both. And then it can be very powerful.
Mm. I love it. Our time has flown by, Ivo. Let me throw a couple more questions at you. One is, so you identify 8 skills around this paradoxically competent, and maybe one that we've been talking about, self-observe and take a meta position. But the second is self-analyze and put the inner world into words.
Yeah.
Could you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah. That is, for I give you an example. I was giving this masterclass training a week ago with a colleague, and I'm the guy from the content, and she likes all these kind of playful working methods. And my self observation is, we discussed, and I felt a lot of resistance. Well, this is not, and I tried to call all kind of arguments not to do that. Right, but then I self-observe. Oh, right, okay, right. I'm steering something in a certain direction. Why does it touches me so? Why am I so vigorous about it? And then I get into self-analyze and say, right, this is my paradox between having control and, yeah, giving freedom, but also let things happen, huh, without being controlled. Right. And I'm very much on this side. And the other thing is, well, I'm a little bit afraid that I'm not taken seriously enough. So that it is all playful, etc. That's childish, and then I associate it with childish. Interesting. That is also my polarity, and that gives me. So the self-analyze is you have to observe it, but where does it come from, and what are charges, emotional charges, convictions that are linked to it, and why is that my behavior? And then you come in the aspect of allowing this discomfort, because then I started to say, okay, you try an exercise. I just monitor, and then I was very anxious. What is going to happen, etc. And I went through that experience, which was very discomforting. But anyway, it worked, etc. So, and that created for me the openness to say, well, maybe there is, and that is the fourth skill. Maybe there is something good at it. Maybe that's something interesting. Maybe that can help us. So, I'm curious. What would be the good thing about it? So. Well, that helped me to open up. But before that, I have to go to this uncomfortable phase, like what is going to happen here?
Mhm. I love it, and I appreciate you sharing that example. And it sounds like in that self analyze that it's with a lens of kindness, compassion, curiosity, and things like that as you're observing and analyzing. Is that which is sometimes difficult for some when we think of self observation and analyze? It can be a challenging thing. How can we look through a lens of kindness and compassion when we're doing that?
Yeah, that's to do it with kindness and compassion it is very difficult to do so. But
Yeah.
anyway, just to allow it, that these things, you don't have to like it anyway, but you
Mm.
anyway allow these things. And for me, I know that if you allow this uncomfort to exist, because my mind will only, if I have a problem, I want to solve it. I will solve it immediately, and I feel shortcoming if I cannot solve it immediately. I find myself stupid or whatever. But allowing this discomfort helped me in the past. The big innovations I did in my work came out from this phase of discomfort, staying in this not knowing phase, etc. And then something arises that you never expected that could rise. And yeah, this gives me the strength that allowing can help me also as a professional or a person, etc. So it is not something that it's not so a masochistic thing, but it is something that can help me uh, be more effective person. I can better listen to others. I can better get things from others that enrich my thinking instead of opposing it. So it helps me to be a better professional. It helps me in my work. So that is my trick to do this discomfort, because it's easy to avoid discomfort, and to have it all. But if you do that, you're always doing the same. You're staying on in the same track, and discomfort helps you to enlarge your framework and to get on another track that you might not have seen before.
Beautiful. Well, our time has flown by. We've made it to this final wrap up question. We ask everybody that comes on how you define or think about wisdom, and I get that maybe the whole conversation has really been on the topic of wisdom, but any sort of brief thoughts around wisdom in daily life to conclude the conversation?
Yeah, I think, well, I think we covered that in large. I think it is knowing, know thyself, I think Socrates said. It's, I think, this is the most important there. And like Tolstoy said, recognizing all these aspects of humanity in yourself help you to empathize with others and to connect with others. And I think to build a better world that where you also where you, because you touches on this humility thing, it is at the end it is not about yourself, but it's about what
Mhm.
you want to contribute to the overall goal, and that gives you the most and the deepest satisfaction. That gives that's the reason why I wrote this book, because it's an it's an awesome also no, it's a terrible thing to do. You're just writing, etc. People are just sitting on terraces and you're writing. And why do you do that? Because you want, because you have, I do this work because it's this higher goal. I want to bring something, and yeah, and that is for me the reason I'm involved in this work. And I think wisdom is linked to this higher, yeah, contributing to this higher purpose.
Well, this has been great, Ivo, and I appreciate the work and the time of coming on the show to talk about paradoxical leadership. It's great. I highly recommend it to the listeners. Is there anywhere that you might point listeners that are interested in learning more about you or your work in the world?
Well, anyway, they can visit the website. It's paradoxical tradeleadership.com. Anyway, they find articles, they find the link to the books, they find all kind of inspiration there. And of course, I recommend them to buy the beautiful book Paradoxical Leadership, who has now 1 week is published. And I think it's it for me it encompasses 15 years of thinking about this matter.
Well, beautiful. We'll put links in the show notes so it's easy to find. Ivo Brugmans, thank you for coming on In Search of Wisdom.
Joshua, thank you.